Welcome to the Depth of Knowledge Introduction module. As an adult education instructor, you have likely experienced and are familiar with the wide variety of activities, tasks, and assignments that learners are asked to complete in the classroom. You've likely also noticed that some of these tasks require complex thinking skills on the part of the learner, while others require less complex thinking for the learners to accomplish the task. Depth of knowledge addresses this variety and the complexity of thinking by categorizing activities and assignments based on this complexity. In this module, we will explore more about what depth of knowledge is and how it can be utilized by adult education instructors in the planning of classroom assignments. Depth of knowledge, sometimes referred to as DOK, is a framework used to categorize assessments and activities used in the classroom based on the cognitive demand or complexity of the level of thinking necessary to complete the task. It was developed by Dr. Norman Webb in 1997. Depth of knowledge is similar to other cognitive frameworks with which you may be familiar, such as Bloom's taxonomy. Later in this module, we will discuss a document that has charts that align DOK with Bloom's taxonomy. The depth of knowledge framework is divided into 4 levels, which we will explore in this module. The College and Career Readiness Standards, or CCRS, are a set of standards that guide the lesson planning and instruction of adult educators. The authors of the CCRS identified key shifts in instruction that are directly related to depth of knowledge. For example, in English language arts, one of the key shifts is evidence, that is, a learner's ability to use evidence from texts in their academic work. In mathematics, one of the key shifts is rigor, requiring that learners demonstrate greater conceptual understanding, procedural skill, and ability to apply math skills in real-world contexts. Both of these key shifts just described require higher-order thinking on the part of learners. If you want to learn more about individual college and career readiness standards, you could use a process called unpacking the standards. As you work through the unpacking process, you will see how depth of knowledge can be used to help determine the types of activities and assignments that would be appropriate for the various standards based on the cognitive demands of the standards, as well as the key shifts. One important note is that just because level 4 of depth of knowledge is the highest, it is not expected that every activity and assignment will reach that level. In fact, it is important that all learners work on assignments at all levels of DOK. You can use DOK to help scaffold your activities and assignments, beginning with the lower levels and working up to the higher levels. As an instructor, being aware of the DOK levels of the assignments and assessments you ask your learners to complete is crucial in ensuring that you are meeting the demands of the CCRS and allowing your learners to engage in tasks that require higher level thinking skills, which are required in college and careers. A useful tool for depth of knowledge is a document titled A Guide for Using Webb's Depth of Knowledge with Common Core State Standards by Karen Hess. This document is available for download on the Pennsylvania Adult Education Resources website in the CCRS Tools and Resources section. It provides more specific details about the levels of depth of knowledge, as well as ideas for activities and products at each level. The document also includes question stems and charts that show how depth of knowledge aligns with Bloom's taxonomy. Much of the information on the slides that follow is based on the information in this guide. As noted earlier, depth of knowledge includes 4 levels: recall and reproduction, skills and concepts, strategic thinking and reasoning, and extended thinking. We will discuss each level in more detail in the next few slides. For each level, we will define the level, list the skills students will be working on, look at some of the verbs that might be used in learning objectives, and finally consider some possible activities and products for each level. By products, we mean what the student will produce, for example, a paragraph, speech, or research paper. Level 1 of depth of knowledge includes activities and assessments in which learners are asked to recall and reproduce information or skills. At this level, learners use skills in recognition, memorization, description, definition, and application of routine processes and procedures. Some of the common verbs you might see in learning objectives for this level are identify, calculate, state, measure, or label. However, we should be careful to not rely too much on verbs alone, but also to take into consideration the complexity of the tasks and content that learners will be working on. There are a variety of potential activities and classroom products at Level 1. For language arts, these could include having students cite sources, label diagrams, and retell information. For math, students may record data, plot points on graphs, and represent math relationships with words, pictures, or symbols. Level 2 moves beyond recall and reproduction and requires learners to apply their skills and understanding of concepts to answer questions or complete tasks. This often includes the application of multiple concepts at once. Objectives for activities at this level might ask learners to make inferences, summarize information, make estimates or predictions, compare and contrast information, identify strategies to use when solving problems, or identify relationships between concepts, such as cause and effect. Some possible activities and products at Level 2 include completing graphic organizers, creating timelines, and writing summaries for language arts. For math, students could use models to represent math concepts, use information from tables and graphs to solve multi-step problems, and provide justification for their solutions to problems. At Level 3, learners continue to use higher-order thinking to plan, reason about, analyze, and evaluate real-world problems, including ones with multiple approaches and possible outcomes. There is an expectation at this level that learners will be able to explain their reasoning and provide evidence to support their conclusions. Learners can be asked to test ideas and hypotheses, critique the work and reasoning of others, participate in debates, interpret data, and select relevant evidence for their claims and arguments. For language arts, possible activities and products at Level 3 could include debating, analysis of the results of surveys, and creating brochures about a topic. For math, students can compare and contrast different methods to solve problems and work to formulate original problems. Activities at Level 3 typically focus on a single text, data set, or source of information. As you will see, Level 4 expands on this to include multiple sources of information. At the highest level of depth of knowledge, Level 4, learners use higher-order thinking skills to complete tasks involving multiple sources of information, which can include collaboration with other learners on project-based assignments solving real-world problems. Often, these activities include planning, designing, and researching. At Level 4 for language arts, learners can work to create products such as research papers and reports, multimedia products such as films that require collaborative work, and organizing community service projects or events. In math, students can design mathematical models to solve problems and work on projects that identify problems and possible solutions, as well as report on the results. Tasks at DOK Level 4 often take an extended period of time to complete. We recommend that you take some time to read through the document we referenced earlier for more examples of activities and question stems to use at all 4 levels in various content areas. Now that we've discussed the 4 levels of depth of knowledge, let's consider an example of assignments at all 4 levels using the same text. This short video provides a review and explanation of the 4 levels and how they can be used to guide the creation of activities and assignments.
The Common Core Learning Standards expect students to perform more cognitively demanding tasks. But how do you know that the tasks students complete meet these rigorous standards? Webb's Depth of Knowledge, or DOK, is one way to measure the cognitive demands of tasks. By using 4 DOK levels that build in complexity, cognitive rigor looks at the DOK as well as the type of thinking required for students to interact with and respond to content. DOK 1 elicits recall and reproduction. DOK 2 focuses on skills, concepts, and basic reasoning. DOK 3 expects strategic thinking and complex reasoning. And DOK 4 requires extended thinking. Depth of knowledge, which is integrated with the revised Bloom's taxonomy in the Hess Cognitive Rigor Matrix, is an important tool as schools begin to increase the rigor of curriculum maps, assessments, and instructional practices to align to the Common Core. Rigorous instructional materials should include a mixture of tasks from across DOK levels. In order to better understand increasing cognitive complexity, let's look at the succession of a social studies task from a DOK 1 to a DOK 4 using the same text. The text we'll be using is the Gettysburg Address.
7 years ago,
The Common Core Learning Standards for Literacy place the Gettysburg Address as a 9th to 10th grade text, so we will focus on aligning tasks to the requirements for this grade band. The following tasks align to the Common Core Reading Informational Text Standards 1, 2, and 6 for these grades. A sample DOK Level 1 task for this text is, what date is Lincoln referring to as 77 years ago? Although this task has a couple of steps, it is DOK 1 because it asks students to identify a footnote explaining that score equals 20 and then do a simple math word problem to calculate that the reference date is 1776. A DOK 2 question that builds off the previous task is, what is the connection between the date 7 years ago and the argument Lincoln is trying to make? This question is a DOK 2 because it asks students to identify the central idea and explain a relationship. The task asks students to determine the significance of the date mentioned. Then, they must explain how this relates to Lincoln's main argument for preserving a nation formed on principles of freedom and equality. As we move on to DOK Level 3 and 4 tasks, we notice that instead of one right answer, there are opportunities for multiple correct answers, with justification and an explanation of reasoning. A DOK Level 3 task for the Gettysburg Address might say, Lincoln's address lays out a thesis and argument in support of equality. Analyze his line of reasoning and the evidence he uses to advance his point of view. This is a DOK 3 task because it asks students to analyze the use of rhetoric as Lincoln relates the basis of equality during the founding of the United States to the fight to end slavery in the battles of the Civil War. A DOK Level 4 task requires extended thinking and in-depth analysis, most often seen in longer-term projects. For example, with this text, a student might be asked to draw from additional related sources, to write a research paper that discusses the role war plays in nation building. This task would require students to refine and deepen their understanding of nation, as presented in Lincoln's speech, and examine how conflict can shape and reshape national borders. It would also require students to analyze and synthesize information from various sources. This task succession focuses on social studies examples, but the basic principles apply across disciplines.
Now let's look at a few examples of learning objectives and see if we can determine on which level of depth of knowledge they focus. If an instructor has an objective which states, the student will be able to calculate 15 multiplication problems involving fractions with 80% accuracy, what DOK level do you think this focuses on? This would fall into DOK Level 1, Recall and Reproduction, since the learners would be doing calculations using the same procedure multiple times. The next example is an objective stating, the student will be able to write a summary of an article, including the main idea and at least 2 supporting details. This is a common assignment for students. At what DOK level do you feel this activity focuses? This is a DOK Level 2, since the learners have to think more conceptually by summarizing information and explaining how ideas are supported with details in a text. Another example of an objective is, the student will be able to write and deliver a persuasive speech, citing at least one source for their supporting evidence and addressing at least one counterargument. What level is this activity? This is DOK Level 3, as learners have to engage in strategic thinking and reasoning to be able to prepare and give a persuasive speech. Finally, if an instructor gave learners an assignment with the objective, the student will be able to write and revise a research paper on a historical question of their choosing, utilizing at least 5 sources of information, which level are they focusing on? This would be a DOK Level 4 assignment, since students are extending their thinking to include synthesizing multiple sources of information to answer a research question. Throughout this module, we have drawn on information presented in the document, A Guide for Using Webb's Depth of Knowledge with Common Core State Standards by Dr. Karen Hess. It is recommended that you spend time reading through this guide, as it provides much more in-depth information about depth of knowledge. It can also be a useful resource as you continue to plan standards-aligned lessons in classroom activities and assignments at the various depths of knowledge. The module and resources for unpacking the college and career readiness standards available on the Pennsylvania Adult Education Resources website can also be very helpful for understanding the connection between depth of knowledge and the CCRS. If you have additional questions, please reach out to your agency's in-house professional development specialist, who should be able to provide you with guidance and resources related to depth of knowledge. On the next slide is a list of sources used for this presentation.